I'm Alexa Schwerha with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. The Supreme Court is set to hear challenges against affirmative action during the 2022-2023 term. And joining us now is an attorney at Southeastern Legal, CeCe O'Leary, to kind of talk more about what these cases mean for the fate of affirmative action in the country. CeCe recently published an opinion piece in Campus Reform that details the role that race plays on college campuses. CeCe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. So one thing that I was really interested in about your op-ed is how you talked about race has now been kind of the start and the end to a student's college experience, and how this obsession with race has really grown on college campuses. Can you talk a little bit more about this and kind of how this all started in higher education?
Yeah, so it's kind of no secret at this point that colleges are considering the race of students who are applying to their schools in the admissions process. But what may be shocking to some people is the fact that this begins really early on in the admissions process. I mean, you have colleges looking at the race of students when they are sophomores, juniors in high school. They are targeting and recruiting minority groups of students based on their skin color. And then they are considering the race of applicants all throughout the admissions process. They will constantly examine the class and look at how the class is shaping up. And they will say, okay, we have a certain number of students of this color. We need more students of this color. And so they will reject or advance the applications of students based on skin color. As you can imagine, this, of course, has repercussions beyond just the legal discrimination, the illegal discrimination, rather, that's happening on campus. This has just societal repercussions, right? I mean, if you look at Columbia University last year, they had 6 different multicultural, segregated graduation ceremonies that were geared towards students based on groups that they identified with. Or if you set foot on a campus, you'll often hear about white students being approached and told that they need to leave a certain space on campus because they're making other students feel unsafe. So we are seeing these really real effects of this discrimination trickling down to the students. Fortunately, Students for Fair Admissions has filed 2 lawsuits, one against Harvard and one against the University of North Carolina, to put a stop to this race-based admissions practice that we're seeing on so many college campuses. And the Supreme Court recently agreed to hear these cases.
That's great. And it's really interesting that you brought up the different graduation ceremonies, because that's something that's been covered here at Campus Reform. Last semester, we ran a similar story at Sam Houston State University in Texas. So it kind of seems like there is this national trend there. But to kind of get back to the challenges that are in front of the Supreme Court, can you break down the legal implications that it's going against Harvard and UNC?
Yeah, exactly. So across our country, in any respect, any aspect that you look at, it is illegal and unconstitutional to be looking at the color of someone's skin and to admit them or exclude them based on their race, right? If you think about restaurants, movie theaters, any place like that, you can't just admit or deny people based on the color of their skin. So why are colleges allowed to do this? Well, there are kind of 2 reasons that colleges have put forth that for now the Supreme Court has accepted for many, many years. The first reason is that they argue that they are remedying the effects of past discrimination. They are righting the wrongs of discrimination from our history. And of course, it's no secret that we do have a history of discrimination in our country, right? And it's an ugly past. And of course, it sounds nice when we say we want to undo these wrongs. The problem, though, is that these policies all directly impact Asian American students the most. They harm Asian American students who are applying to these colleges. Study after study shows that the Asian American students are actually hiring businesses. There are whole businesses out there devoted to making them appear less Asian in their applications so that they will have a higher chance of being admitted to college. And if you look at our history, we don't have a great history of how we've treated Asian Americans, right? They have been discriminated against as well. Look at our internment camps or the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it can't be that we are correcting the effects of past societal discrimination when Asian Americans are still being impacted by this. The other thing I'll add is that Chief Justice John Roberts once said, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. It can't be that to remedy these past wrongs and to fix discrimination, we need to continue discriminating and just change who we discriminate against. So that's one reason that colleges put forth and one way that they've kind of gotten away with these race-based admissions policies. The other excuse that they offer is this diversity of thought principle. And so since the 1970s, so for many, many years, colleges have argued that they should be the marketplace of ideas that are open to all students, should be an open forum for inquiry and discussion. We all agree with that, right? We believe that college should be an open marketplace. However, colleges argue that they need to promote diversity of thought through diversity of color. In other words, they believe that by admitting students of different races, they will produce diverse viewpoints on campus. The problem with this, there are many problems with it, but there's one reason is that it's very stereotypical to suggest that students of one race all think the same way, that they all act the same way, that they all feel the same way. And so by saying we want more students of this race or that race, you're putting a lot of pressure on those students to feel like they need to represent an entire racial group. That's one issue with it. The other issue with this diversity of thought principle is that diversity of thought has actually decreased over the years on college campuses. I mean, I know you guys know this. You're on campus all the time interviewing students. We see it all the time through our 1A project where we work to defend college students' First Amendment freedoms. Students are self-censoring at an alarming rate. They are choosing to remain silent rather than risk saying something offensive or rather than risk being reported to a biased response team. And so these are the ways that colleges have been able to get away with these race-based admissions policies for so long. But fortunately, the Students for Fair Admissions lawsuits have kind of blown up this narrative. And suddenly the Supreme Court is faced with the reality of the past however many years it's been, where diversity of thought has decreased. And the effects of past discrimination haven't gone away because Asian American students are still being discriminated against.
Right, and it's interesting you bring up the Asian American point because one thing that people who maybe support using race-based admissions in college campuses, they argue that this actually isn't discriminating based on race. Can you kind of just explain where they're coming from and what would your response be to that?
Yeah, so my response is this. Our Constitution and our nation's laws are colorblind. It is a well-settled principle in our nation that we don't look at the color of one's skin. We are founded on the principle of equality. That is what we need to be fighting for. That is what we stand for. And so it doesn't matter which group is being discriminated against at which time. Discrimination is discrimination. It is unconstitutional and it is illegal.
So I do want to switch the topic a little bit and talk a little bit more about what's happening on the Supreme Court. We have Justice Breyer who announced his retirement, and Joe Biden now has the opportunity to fulfill that campaign promise to put the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. Now, we've seen through the past two Supreme Court justices who have been appointed, we saw Brett Kavanaugh, who was asked to recuse himself in cases involving President Trump, since he might have a personal tie to those cases. We saw the same thing with Amy Coney Barrett, where she was asked to recuse herself from cases involving abortion because of her religious beliefs. Do you think that if Biden's justice nominee is appointed, she would have to recuse herself from any cases involving affirmative action?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it's unfortunate that our court has become so politicized from the sense of the nomination process, right, where every politician is kind of using it as a platform these days. I think that a good justice is a good justice. And ultimately, it comes back to this idea of our Constitution being colorblind. You know, if the justice is going to uphold these founding principles that we believe in, then they should do so. But yeah, it's unfortunate that, you know, we've heard this narrative about nominating a certain Supreme Court justice based on the color of their skin or whatever other criteria the president might put forth. What we should be looking at is merit. And so at the end of the day, whether it's a Supreme Court justice or a college student, that should be what matters, you know, what they're going to bring to the court or to a college campus. What matters is their merit and their points of view that they have to offer.
Absolutely. And just to wrap up here, what should Americans be looking for as this case unfolds?
Yeah, a great question as well. So I think there are a couple things going on here. You know, like I said, there's this idea of remedying the effects of past discrimination. Hopefully this case will prove to Americans that we really are founded on equality, that the time has come to do away with race-based admissions policies, and it's time to move forward as a nation, looking at what's on the inside of a person and treating each other equally in that regard. And I hope that this case will also promote more diversity of thought on campus. I think the case has kind of blown up the narrative of the fact that college campuses are open to all sorts of viewpoints, when we have seen over the years that it's actually been more and more closed to diverse viewpoints. I think this case has done a lot to make the public more aware of that. And so I encourage students, especially watching, to speak up and speak out and to not be discouraged. And I hope this case will do that as well for them.
Fantastic. Well, CeCe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.